Hi, I'm Greg. I hire the product design people at Facebook. Been there about 2 years, and it's been a crazy time because obviously we've more than doubled in those 2 years. So we have a lot of challenges with that. We're around 47 product designers now, and when I started, we were around 20, 21. So yeah.
All right. So I'm Phil, director of product design at Box. I've taken Box from. I took over from our CEO as a designer, and that was about 5 years ago.
Nice.
He was doing it in Microsoft Paint. It was pretty awesome. But basically now we're about a team of about eight UI designers, and myself, I still design a lot.
Hi, I'm Wesley. I currently work at Samsung Design America. Prior to that, I was working at Motorola, and prior to that, I was working at RIM, and prior to that, I was working at Palm. Prior to that, I was working at agencies, so I've done a lot of hiring and bringing up people, mentoring, and I've also brought a lot of people with me through these jobs, so I'd like to share those experiences.
My name is Andre Hirazmchuk. Until the end of last year, I was the director of design at Twitter, and I started there when it was a little bit smaller and helped get the team going from about 12 people to 40-ish or so, and did pretty much a lot of recruiting and hiring there. Before that, I was at Yahoo for a small stint, and for a long time, I was also the guy at Adobe Systems. So I did the Creative Suite, and I started the design team at Adobe back in the mid-90s when they didn't have a design team. So I had some various experience from there of things that I did not know what I was doing. So I've kind of wide range of experience in different ways.
We're first going to talk about generally screening designers, and then the second part of the discussion will focus more about onboarding them onto your team. So the first question I like to ask is, generally when you come across designers, whether it be through referrals or online portfolios, how do you generally assess their skill, potential capacity, experience, to make sure that it's a right fit for the given company that you're at now or previously? I can start with you, Greg.
Oh, you want me to start? I think generally we want designers that don't want to work at Facebook. That's how it starts. Like the people that, it's kind of like dating. It's like the ones that you want, they don't want you back. So that's kind of how it starts. I think, and you guys, everyone's probably going to have different stories about this, but when I joined the company, it was no longer a startup, and we were still acting like a startup. So the conversations were always around, are you scrappy? Like, what have you built? Is there stuff that we can play with? Those kinds of things. I think the biggest thing is, can you just put somebody in front of this giant thing and have them create a diamond out of a piece of coal, which is probably a terrible analogy. But that's kind of the biggest thing we look for. We look for people that can code. We look for people that can make stuff look good. We look for people that know how to communicate. And it's pretty hard to find all three of those things, which is probably why we're here today. So I'll start with that.
All right.
By the way, I'm questioning your authenticity because you didn't wear your glasses. Oh, do they have glasses? That's the other thing.
I have good vision. So,
okay, good.
As a designer.
I was going to say, okay, great.
Yeah, so for me, it is all about the portfolio, though. I mean, I go through,
sure.
Like we use JobVite right now, basically to all our candidates come through JobVite. All I do is on JobVite, I go through and do searches for .com, because it's like I'm looking at so many candidates, and I know some people use weird URLs and stuff, but it's like if I can just find your portfolio, that lets me see through so much crap.
For sure.
I mean, like, really, if you're looking for a designer, you're looking for people that are experienced, but you can judge someone in like 15 seconds if you go to their website or you go to the Behance or their portfolio site. It's way quicker than judging someone by reading a massive resume. Mm-hmm. You do that after. You definitely need to do that after and go and look through the experience stuff. But the portfolio, it has to be there.
Yep.
That said, too, as I found is So Box is an enterprise solution, but I definitely do not look for designers that have done enterprise solution stuff, because usually that means that they're jaded, they've designed really complex systems, and they are still complex. So usually it's people that are more in the consumer mindset, even though we are designing for an enterprise solution. And just really looking for people that can really take a complex idea and make it simple at the same time. I don't know how far you want to go in this part of the line of questioning, but it's we at Box also do like an example project, and we usually do an example project on things we may or may not be working on. Which usually we're probably working on it, and we get a lot of really good examples from people, and we're able to judge them really well because we're very used to what they're actually trying to solve. As opposed to if you just look at someone's portfolio, they're solving all sorts of problems, and really to get your head, wrap your mind around what they're actually trying to solve, it's actually kind of hard for you too. So if you can equal the playing field and get the same kind of problem, then you can kind of really see what they're going to think. You have to have an open mind though. They don't know any of the background information you have. It's just more of the thought process. Oh, let you go now.
For me, I work in such a very specific or specialized sort of environment. I don't know that I've actually hired anybody except you that was cold. Like I think you were one of the few designers that I hired cold. Almost everybody I've hired is someone I know or somebody knows them. At least 2 people know everybody that I've worked with. I currently work with a guy named Ben. He worked with a girl named Courtney. You know, they work together at iPod. They now, they work with Guy. Guy now works with me. You know, this kind of incestuous little group of folks keep traveling, and they all go into different places, but we all know each other because creating user experiences on devices is a very sort of specific thing. So usually by the time I'm talking to them, I know their reputation, I know their work, I know whether or not this is going to be a good fit. And so if we're having a conversation, it's usually because I've assessed all of those things, and I can gauge whether or not they're going to be interested.
Yeah, no, definitely. So it's like kind of like the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon game, right?
Totally.
You'd be surprised how relevant that is, though. But a lot of it is actually coverage as well, too. So, I mean, there's portfolios, there's people that you know, but you're going to have to do a lot of scouting. And it's almost as if part of your job, at least part of my job half the time, is being like a scout. I don't know if this is what scouts do on like football teams or basketball teams, but it's not just so much knowing the people that the folks on the team know or would recommend, which is generally a large part of your really good target pool is going to be the +1 folks, the people that are 1 degree away from people on your team. It's also the +2 and the +3 levels, and those take lots of different tacks to find. There's going down chains of folks, and there's also making sure that you don't miss those opportunities at conventions and trade shows and gatherings and events and whatever that is, because that's also where you'll discover that you find all those connections. Because the ones you can trust, the connections that you can trust, will often lead you to the portfolios that you feel more confident about, that you want to spend time doing and time working with. People tend to, when they fail looking for sourcing, they tend to stop. And actually the point that you fail is when you talk to that person and say, okay, I got it, you don't want to work here. Do you know anybody else? And have them, and that's the +2, +3 levels. And you just gotta start building out that network and build out it's like coverage, like getting a coverage pool of candidates. I spent an enormous amount of time doing that, and that's where you find a lot of value and whatnot. Yes?
Can you talk about conventions or different events? Have you found any that have been the most beneficial?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So in the past it was South by Southwest for a long time. These days the conferences are kind of blown out more. So there's Build, which is Scotland or Ireland? I always forget. It's Ireland. There's Brooklyn Beta. There's Interaction. Interaction 13 is going to be in Toronto next week.
Cold.
Yeah, exactly.
I said to my team, you guys want to go this year? They're like, where is it?
Exactly. and they're all over the place. And then there's just like all the gathering events, like the stuff that Enrique and Designers Fund is doing here in the Bay Area. I know like Twitter last night had a they call the Ballers, whatever that is. There was a bunch of people there.
It was cold.
It was cold. They had it on the deck.
I'm apparently cold. So.
Yeah. So you can't underestimate any of those kinds of things. But it used to be South by Southwest was the one pool. You can still use that as a place to pull from, but it's become very hard in my book. Actually, one funny thing about the sourcing thing, I'm not going to mention her name. She was the most impressive recruiter I'd ever seen. I will mention that she worked at Apple. And at South by Southwest, she was a master at the +1, +2, +3 stuff. She would go to all the parties and hang out with all the quote-unquote cool kids. And she knew how to work a room. She knew how to get information. She knew how to be fun and not do the active, like, come work at Apple there and then do it after the fact. But, she wouldn't stop at you. She would ask you, who do you know in the room? And you would say, oh yeah, you should go talk to that person. And she would, by the end of an event, she'd have like 30 people. And if I looked at that pool of people, I'd be like, crap, that's like 20 of those people are pretty amazing. So you can't underestimate that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that networking is really valuable, but it's also getting to know them so that you know when to contact them.
Right.
Because they might not be right for every job, and if you contact them every time you skip jobs, then it just becomes like that's
a very good point.
I mean, if you sort of tailor that call to that person, then they know to take that phone call seriously.
Yeah, I mean, definitely tailoring it to them. Basically, that's one thing to have the recruiter keep calling them to get them updated and like trying to get them on board and get them stoked about coming to work for you. But actually having the hiring manager, the designer, like to actually give the call to the person means 10 times what it meant for just the recruiter to give them a call. They're going to answer that call and they're going to want to talk to you, and they'll actually be truthful with you, and they're much more likely to come on board.
So Facebook did a lot of that too, right? I mean, from what I know, well, I mean, how you guys got Nick Felton, right? How did you get Josh Williams and those kinds of people?
I think like, I hate the word recruiter. I'll say that. Like, I think it's a dirty word. I think it's, I think it's for the military. I think it's for other people. I don't think it works in our industry. I think I was a designer for like 10 years before I moved to this side. And I lived in New York. I was okay. I wasn't great, obviously, because now I do this. But recruiters would call you, and you'd be in the middle of whatever, and they'd be like, "Hey, can I talk to you?" And it's like that kind of salesman, car pitch, desperation. Like, recruiters got a really bad name in New York, and it was to the point where if a recruiter called you, you didn't want to help them.
Right.
You'd be like, yeah, let me give you the name of somebody. Here's the guy I hate on my team. He sucks, and no one likes him. Or her. So I think like the idea of what you're talking about, and I think I know who you're talking about, which is pretty cool. We can talk about it. I think the more sincere you can be about not only the company that you're looking for a designer for, but design in general, like truly have a sincere, like you don't have to know everything. You don't have to be up on the latest stuff, but to be able to just talk about stuff in a way that is like conversational and talk about, and then move into, well, we have opportunities. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I've been to a lot of invitations from other companies where, okay, we want you to work here, but we're never going to say that.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's kind of a Valley thing. Like, as someone from New York, like I've been here 2 years, and I was like, wow, you want me to come visit your startup? And then I'd get there and I'd be like, oh, you want me to come work at your startup? So I think there's a lot to be said for that sort of super casual but sincere way of, of getting to know people.
You mentioned some of the conversations that you have with people, whether it be at events or, in other formats. What are some of the topics or questions that you talk about when you're, in a room with someone and, being sincere?
I don't know. For me, it's more actually just talking about what you're doing and talking about the product and talking about all the latest trends and all the cool ideas about what you could be doing, because that's, you're getting someone stoked about what you're working on, and hopefully they have something else they're working on equally that they're going to be really excited about. Because for a really good designer, they should be really motivated to make an awesome product. I've met a bunch of good visual designers that are not motivated, and when they're not motivated, how are you going to pitch your ideas not only to other execs and things, but just to engineers, to talk to people, to get them in part of your vision? And so like all of it is really just talking to people about what you're doing. I don't know.
Yeah, I think just through casual conversation, you can assess whether they're like cognitively rigid, or if they are flexible or curious, or things that you can't actually teach a person. You can suss out whether or not, you know, they're actively involved or engaged in the community, if they're actively involved in sort of understanding what's current or what is you know, cutting edge in terms of your industry. And just through a casual conversation of having, you know, a few things to talk about, you can get all of that, and that's sort of the beginning of whether or not you want to actually pursue them as a candidate, or just keep them in a back pocket and maybe they'll mature or change over time. But
I always take the direct approach. You know, he knows this too, by the way.
yeah.
So I do take the direct approach, and usually it starts in a face-to-face or an email with me saying, "Look, I don't care. I just want to talk to you about coming here." The thing about that, by the way, is that I tend to find that works. The effort you want to put into that is going to be the ones that are going to be your leads, the ones that are going to be your senior people. And if you target 5 people for something, and you get one of those people, that one person, when they come on board, is going to suddenly start to fill out a bunch of folks on the rest of the team. So they'll start to do all the more casual and the more kind of just growing culturally and organically kind of growth. But to get them, one of the guys I snagged for Twitter, who I thought was a very key person, who I thought would never want to join and leave his job and all that kind of stuff. I mulled it over for I think 3 months, and then I finally just pulled up an email, and just said, "Hey, you know what? I'm just going to be bold. I want you to come work here. What is it going to take?" And I didn't get a response from him for about a week, and then he responded. He's like, "Okay, we can talk." So he obviously mulled it over, and it took me like 4 months, and I got him, and he's now helping out in a bunch of other ways. But yeah, sometimes being very direct, I think especially with very senior key people, is they don't want to be bullshitted. They don't want to be as long as you let them know what's up, then I think you'll have a better shot of having an honest conversation with them. But the honest conversation you absolutely have to have, definitely. I
think going along with that too is, and this is where you kind of have to be obsessive about the following, like the Twitter stalking. Mm-hmm. Like when people launch projects, like big projects, right after that tends to be a really good time to reach out.
Yeah,
for sure. Because especially in the design world, it's like they've worked on something really hard, and generally they're ready for the next challenge. They're like, okay, I'm done. And some of the people we've gotten, that's when we've gotten them. It's like, okay, I did all I can do for this company. Now I'm ready for a bigger challenge.
Right. And it's always surprising because just even asking, you would say to yourself, they will never leave that job. Mm-hmm. They seem to have so many options. They have a really good situation. They've got a great team. Why would they possibly leave? And then you ask them, and they're like, "Yeah, I'll come." You're like, why?
And you know what? A lot of that, especially with design, I think that isn't, at least the people we hire, that's not the first thing they care about. Exactly. They're not coming for money. They're not coming for stock options. They're coming for the opportunity to make something that's awesome that a lot of people are going to use. Yeah. And I think when you realize that, you can kind of work through those kind of conversations. Exactly. Money is the last thing I ever talk to anyone about. Yeah. Last thing.
Yeah. I mean, the things that get designers excited is impact and scale, right? And absolutely. So at a Facebook, at a Box, Twitter, I mean, it's an easy conversation to have.
Yeah. Sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes.
One question. Especially with young designers, have you ever tried, project-based stuff, or basically doing some contract work just to feel out how good the designer is, or even on the side of the job maybe that they're currently doing? And secondly, you mentioned on a more practical level that you use JobVite, search.com. That's really helpful. I've been trying to use Behance a lot, which has a lot of beautiful portfolios. 7/8 of the people I reach out to are like, "Oh, actually, I'm not looking for a job. I just have my stuff on Behance." It's kind of hard to do that. So can you guys talk about some of the other resources that maybe you use? I know you don't hire cold as much, but, that we could all use to find new designers?
So to answer the question on trying to actually contact people like directly through networks, it is pretty hard because that's pretty much like you're cold calling the person. I mean, you have no real relationship with the person. The only way you could really get them is to get them excited about the idea somehow, or you just blast out tons of emails. I mean, I don't think that's really effective either. But it is worth it if you're really interested in a certain candidate, is making it, you know, personalized and that kind of thing, and you're actually trying to contact the person, making sure they're not really overseas either. That's usually helpful.
One trick that I'm sure everybody else uses, and it's funny how many people I think aren't aware of what LinkedIn is actually showing things. But if I find somebody's work on a Behance or a Coreflot or whatever, the first thing I'll do is I'll pop their name into LinkedIn, and then it's like, does anybody I know happen to know this person? And then I contact that person and say, what do you think of this guy? If I know them. And then if I get a positive there, I was like, well, would they respond to me reaching out, or would you mind asking them? Or so there's that kind of stuff. Is getting somebody that, you know, again, that +1, +2 kind of stuff is actually extremely helpful. And that is definitely a tactic I use a lot, is to first find out if I know anybody else that knows them, and just do a little bit of kind of homework back there.
In terms of the example project, usually people are very receptive to doing an example project. You just have to be able to let them know that, hey, you can use this in your portfolio after, because I'm actually asking you for free work. You just need to be able to say that if you're putting this in your portfolio, you have to say that this was an example project, and it wasn't something that it was actually commissioned by the company to do or something. But that way they actually get some worth out of it as well.
I would even go further than that, though. I mean, if you're going to ask people to do projects, you know, it's their work. It's not yours. You should let them do whatever the hell they want, say whatever the heck they want to say about it, in my opinion.
No, they can. I just ask them to do that.
No, I know, but some people, some people I think when they do it, they don't want to share. So if you want to do that, you shouldn't share anything that you think is going to be, you know, don't even go down that path. If you're going to have any concerns about them doing a concept that you don't want the world to see, or I just find that to be very tenuous ethically. And the moment you ask people to do projects, it's their work. They can do whatever they want, and then they can even say whatever they want.
And beyond example work, though, have you ever hired a designer for, you know, a 3-month gig or just anything more like that? And what you've been able?
So Facebook we don't really deal with that kind of stuff. Like, we don't have design exercises or stuff like that. Occasionally we'll quiz people when they're there, like get up on the whiteboard and we'll show you stuff. Some of that is probably a legality, that we're worried that someone's going to do some work and all of a sudden they're going to like get compensated for it. So we do have some people that we bring in and we put them on a 3-month contract, and they basically have that amount of time for the team to say, okay, we have a space for you, or we don't. And 70% of the time they come on as full-time designers. We don't use it a lot, but we do use it once in a while. And usually it's for junior designers. It's for people that you know, we're not quite sure what their strengths are. And the one thing I wanted to say, you brought up like Behance and all those sites. I'm really scared of those sites, and I'll tell you why. They frame everything exactly the same. We always look for someone, and you'd mentioned this earlier, Phil, that has their own website. Like, that to us is the first sign. Like, what have you built that represents you? So if someone has their name.com, like, that's what we want to see. And I can't think of anyone we've hired that didn't have their own. At the very least, there's probably a few people we've hired that they worked pretty intensely on one project or one product that we know. So maybe they have a splash page that represents themselves. And the other thing is, like, every designer I'm thinking of right now, very few of them actually have a portfolio site, because they're so busy with Facebook stuff. So don't always think, like, if you hear whispers of someone that's great and you can't find any work by them, like, that's almost a good thing. Like, that means they're working so hard wherever they are. Like, you know, take the time to get to know whatever company they're working on, check out what products that company is releasing, and then when you have the conversation with them, you can be like, what have you worked on? Apple's a great example. Like, if you ever talk to a designer at Apple, you have no idea what they've worked on. Like, they might have worked on a button this big for 6 months. So, yeah.
Speaking of Apple, I've never tried this, but one of the things I've heard was Apple designers, they go onto forums and they ask questions about some sort of technically difficult thing, about how to make an icon or something like this, incognito, slightly under the radar. And then when people respond back and they have really great answers to your very difficult questions, then they start the conversation, keep the conversation going, and then befriend them. You know, it all sounds very covert and like really.
You know what it does? It kind of sounds like Apple.
Yeah, but that's what they do, and then they'll say, "Hey, by the way, we work at Apple, and we really like what you had to say about this. Would you like to come in and talk to us?"
Now, having said all of that, being at these bigger companies and these bigger corporations, everybody knows right now there's just a shortage of both people to fill the jobs and people with the skill sets to fill the jobs. So, I mean, the tactics that we're talking about are a little bit easier to pull off the bigger corporation you are, quite frankly. You know, just know that. At the same time, though, you know, the Apple tactic I have heard of, and there are some things that I've seen that are similar that are remarkably effective. But yeah, so everybody should just know that all the big companies are experiencing problems. Period. It's just a problem for everybody right now. So
I know there's probably some transition between when you meet someone in person or virtually and when you actually start to kind of quote unquote like interview them. So I know that's like one little mini hurdle. So I'm wondering if there's some like do's and don'ts, like, because sometimes you can jump the gun and say, hey, you want to come in and like interview? They're like, no, I don't want to come interview. And it's like, you know, you shouldn't probably have asked that and maybe been that direct. So I'm wondering if there's some do's and don'ts when you're actually starting to move more into kind of like an interview, testing, sample project phase.
yeah, I mean, phone screens, JobVite, scoring systems, all that stuff. You know, the Twitter culture was a large part from the Google culture as well too. In you know, a lot of phone screens, a lot of, if you wanted to fly somebody out from, you know, Seattle or New York or Chicago or wherever, they had to have, you know, multiple phone screens before the company would front for that kind of and pay for that kind of thing. The phone screen stuff is, you know, it's kind of funny actually. The phone screens that I did over Skype were more effective than the ones I did on the phone. So being able to see the person and talk to them and get their reaction was good. But the first part of it is talking through process and talking. You're just going to talk about who they are and how they think. And I always found the phone screen process was less about the work and more about, is this person going to be a good cultural fit first, before we even bother with the portfolio interview, presentation, bring them in kind of thing. Because, you know, if you've got a great designer and they're not going to fit with the team, then it's just not going to be worth trying to do. But the phone screen part about process and how they think and who they are and what they're looking to do, and also a little bit of kind of trying to inspire them a little bit about the opportunity of working at the place. I tend to found that those kinds of things were more effective than just kind of dry, here's a list of 5 questions, you know, please answer these 5 questions, and then we'll score you on that, and then somebody else will talk to you, and then maybe we'll bring you in kind of thing. That's just my take. I don't know.
In terms of the actual phone screen, what I actually found the most informative is actually what questions they ask at the end.
Yeah.
And you say, hey, well, what questions do you want to ask me about working at Box? And then those are like, wow, you really get if the person is really into it, they've really thought about the space, they've done their homework, like all sorts of things. Because some people have like a whole list of questions and they've actually really done their research, they're really motivated by it. Other people are just like, no questions, and they just hang up and you're just like, yeah, okay, that person was great before then, but wow, do not want this at all. Like.
That's a good point. That's a very good point.
I think it's hard too, because like, what if they're having a bad day?
Yeah.
You know, and like their work's great. So, I mean, I agree with you. I think like culture fit, we never use that phrase, but it's true. It's like, they're designers, like, are they gonna have the right socks on when they show up? These are the kinds of things that a designer's gonna be like, you know, he had great work, but that shirt, it just didn't quite do it for me. And it's, you know, the joke that we always have in the hiring department is, it depends. Like, everything is, it depends. It depends on the day the designer's having that's gonna interview this person. It depends on what he had for breakfast. Like, there's so many, it's not like engineering where you can kind of slot these questions in, like the kind of the Google way, and like, you know, how many marbles or whatever.
Right.
Like, you're dealing with like some really touchy-feely kind of people. And I think people in our position, like, that's kind of our job, is to kind of touch and feel as much as possible, so that when they actually get into like the nuts and bolts, they're like set up for success. At least that's what we try to do with the people we bring in.
Yeah, I find that a lot of designers are slightly insecure. They maybe slightly OCD, or you know, they've got all these like issues. Yeah, well, very OCD, and so like really understanding how those idiosyncrasies may work within your group, and if you have the kind of environment that supports that, is super key to making sure that those people will come in and do well. Or, you know, if you have the kind of culture that just sort of is, and I've been in all kinds of different cultures where, you know, ones where people are really harsh on each other, like super mean, like to the point of like, wow, that's uncalled for. You know, you might not want to bring those kinds of folks in, but you know, if the environment is right for a person where they can sort of grow and thrive, then I think that's.
I think some of it along that, it's like some of it's how big is your company too, and how big is your design team. Like, in some ways, the bigger a team gets, the more room there is to kind of like, okay, this guy's an amazing designer. He can't finish a sentence. You know, maybe we can have some people sort of like talk for him. Yeah, you know,
right.
I kind of think of it like a baseball team. Like, there's certain guys you just shouldn't put in front of the camera after the game. Like, these are the ones that should not be talking to the press about how the game went.
Yeah.
And I feel like if you have the right environment that can kind of nurture that, then you have a little more room for, you know, maybe someone with a bigger ego or a lesser communicator.
Right. One thing I do remember doing pretty consistently, and I requested this, and I don't know if they still do it or not, but once you do identify the candidates that do pass like the discussion points, the talking, the asking questions, and or whatnot, I would always request to talk to them before they came in. And I did that because I wanted to give some consistency about expectation for how the interview process was actually going to work. And more importantly, I would tell folks that I'm about to give them what the test is going to be. Like if you were in college and you had the answers to the test beforehand, I'm about to give you those answers. But I was, you know, kind of lying, but whatever. But basically what I did is I would tell them things like, you know, you're going to come in, we want you to do a portfolio presentation, you're going to talk to these folks. I would tell them exactly how it's going to happen. And then basically what I was trying to let them know is that, look, when you come in, we need to know who you are. We need to know how you think. You need to be prepared. You need to have done something that is thoughtful. We need to see all kinds of things about you. So if you come in and that doesn't happen, I'm going to be the guy, unfortunately, in the first 30 minutes of the day that we've planned for you, is going to walk up to you and say, look, I'm sorry, this is not going to work out, and I'm going to walk you out of the room. And I would tell people this, just to set it up properly, just to make sure they understood, but mostly to try to get them ready, and then I would start to get them inspired. It's like, you know, we want people to work here. We want to everybody on the team, you know, there's empty chairs next to these people. You're going to be talking to folks who you have to show them why you get to sit in that empty chair that's next to their desk. You know, so be ready to talk about that. Be ready to talk about who you are in your process and have stuff, you know, what do you like about our products? What do you hate about our products? Be honest. And just, I would have this conversation as the final part of the phone screening process so that whenever a person come in, you know, hopefully I got them amped up enough that they would show up and they would be ready, prepared. Right. They didn't just show up blind and they would just flail. You know, it's not intended to scare them. It's intended to get them ready for showtime.
The flip side of that is also having your own team prepared, right? I mean, so that they're not asking overlapping questions or the same questions over and over again. Making sure you have a coordinated effort in terms of understanding what role you're hiring for and what you're really looking for as a group, and each can ask a different sort of facet of the larger picture of who this person is. I think I've been to too many interviews where I keep having to answer the same question over, and I keep changing my story because it's boring for me. And so I can only imagine at the end when they're all like, what was that guy about? And I'm like, I don't know. He seems really confused. But I think coordinating on your own side.
I think that's more important than ever because of what you said. Like, there's just not that many designers right now. And every designer is probably talking to 3 different companies, 5 different companies, 4 startups, maybe a big one, maybe a medium-sized one. So you have to be really united in the dialogue and the conversation that your team is going to have with this person when they come in.